Jan asked me to say a little bit about People in Aid. We are a network of NGOs. We have over 200 NGOs who are members, and they are headquartered in over 45 countries. And they are a member of People in Aid because we are about good practice in managing people in the humanitarian and development sector. So what we do is we produce materials and research and run events and networks which enable organizations around the world to swap their good practice and learn from each other. And some of that learning is what I will present to you today. So I'm going to talk about people, but I'm also going to talk about things that organizations need to do. What people working in aid do or can achieve is often facilitated or made more difficult by the organizations and their actions and their choices. So the policies and the practices and the processes related to recruitment and selection, to briefing, role descriptions, management support, leadership, and all of that kind of stuff. But there's a trend and a challenge here, I think, already, because HQ should not be always the decision maker. So what you have to work out as an organization is the extent to which you will allow decisions to be made by your leaders in country against assessing local risks there. You'll have to work out how much flexibility you're going to allow to a country program to adapt a policy benchmark or some decision, some objective which comes out of HQ. But what I'm going to talk about is, first of all, the past, a bit on the past, and then I'm going to offer some insights into future thinking, which mostly come from the private sector because they tend to be investing more in research than we are. And then I'll offer some trends and some challenges and give the last word to our beneficiaries. I'm not going to mention humanitarian in every sentence because I think some of what I say is more generally applicable because we are all people and most of us are employees. And what I hope I will do is provoke some thoughts and offer perhaps some light bulb moments, some things for you to capture and take back. So on the past, there are some stereotypes I think that we have to get rid of. And there's the first one, which is the Superman hero from the past. The other one that rests still with us a bit is the Sun King, which is topical, I suppose, in France. So the issue of leaders being there in order to be perceived as leaders, purely that, and not to do the role that they're set to do. And this is about trying to model good behaviors. This Superman is not a good model for behaviors. Rory once taught me the French expression for this, which is le mouton à cinq pattes. Is that right? The person who can do everything. They're no longer good role models. And indeed, one of my larger members at the moment is going through all its job descriptions, all its assessment and selection processes to root out all the stuff which has come from this 25 years of supermen and women who have been identifying the system there. A lot of the past is on Rwanda, and People in Aid was founded after Rwanda based on a lot of the problems that came out. And this is a summary of the survey which was done, which gave birth to People in Aid as a global organization. And some of these issues which you see here, so the emotional impact, pre-departure preparation, in-country management, security, witnessing suffering, they're still with us. And here is a list of the issues which we presented at one of Bioforce's ETIKUMA events in 2005. I won't go through them, but these in that year were the issues which were most taxing our members. Now, you could say plus ça change, because a lot of them are probably very much on your agenda today. But I think the issue is that at the time of Rwanda, they were genuine problems, that they challenged the ability of the humanitarian system to deliver what it needed to do. Now, at least, there is a lot more awareness of what the issues are, and there is a lot more commitment to continuous improvement. And just to drop the word humanitarian HR in, Save the Children International is using the phrase that humanitarian HR is HR in a hurry. So as long as you've got the basic HR systems and practices in place, speed them up. So the future, we work with two groups who are both called the Future of Work, coincidentally, and that's apart from Randolph's organisation. One's based at the London Business School and the other is a global network of consultants who do nothing but think about the future. And the private sector and the public sector are researching, they're concluding, and they're acting. And here are some of the thoughts from various interactions that we've had over the last 2-3 years with these groups. And I've grouped them according to technology, workplace, and talent, because those are the three areas which they are most tested by. So on the technology, I've got 3 points, which I'll repeat to you. The first is information overload. This will not be a surprise. So the phones are available 24/7. There is nothing you cannot find out if you want to. Sometimes this is good. So clearly in Port-au-Prince, within 3-4 hours, you could find out which chemists were still open. That's fantastic. But it's very hard on staff. So I think given the information overload, there are some things that organizations have to build in to their workforce. So managers need to be taught to recognize burnout. They clearly need to be allowed to give staff their downtime and psychosocial support. Skills such as mentoring and coaching and good management need to be absolutes for anyone who is out in the field. And increasingly independent decision-making needs to be accepted about what is doable in the circumstances. So I'll come back to donor-led and organization-led targets later. The second idea from the sector about technology is that the communication relies on one language on the whole. So an Indian organization will have Hindi as its main organizational language, whatever the native speakers are. For most organizations, sadly, that's now English. The third technological issue is how new technology adds value or competes with what you've got already. So how willing is an organization to do its recruitment by social media or to trust in e-learning as the development solution for the future? How can you encourage communities of practice to grow up amongst your dispersed staff so that they can break out of their geographic or departmental silos? These kinds of technologies allow what is increasingly necessary, remote working, distance management, and that's very necessary. So those are the 3 technological points that they make. On the workspace issue, work is becoming more virtual. So workers are fleeing to their homes for peace and quiet, while employers are very happy to get rid of them because offices are carbon heavy. There was a very interesting case study presented at our conference last year by one of the Belgian ministries, and this was the ministry which was second from the bottom in terms of where new civil servants would choose to go and work. They didn't want to go there. So the new permanent secretary got a new office space, he got the staff to design it, and now it's the top choice for all the new civil servants. And the issue there is partly about the space, it's partly about having the staff design it, but it's also about the decisions made about the flexibility to work. It's a 24-hour office, so you're not expected to be there between 9 and 5. If you want to look after your children at home, then you come in between 3 o'clock and 10 o'clock when perhaps your partner gets back to look after them. There's all sorts of ways in which the workspace can be made more friendly, and the future is certainly there. Combined with that, there's a re-emergence of what the private sector is calling co-located work, and I think actually aid workers are there already. This is about workers who are not in an office actually going to Starbucks and meeting there. And I think in many of the places where aid workers work, we already have our pubs and our favorite Java house cafes and so on. And the third area is the virtual labor market. So you're not actually employing these people at all. So through online sites like Odesk and Elance, you can actually find virtual people. You'll never meet them, but they've got their skills, they're highlighted on those sites. You can just take them for that piece of translation or that piece of communication. And the final one is on talent, where there are 6 considerations that they put out. The first is that the CEO of your organization is your chief talent scout. And a recent survey of American CEOs found that 92% of them wanted the learning and development metrics for their organization on their desk more regularly than any other. The fact that only 6% of them got those is another matter about the metrics and the return on investment that we're able to supply. The role of experience versus education. So again, from this study in the US, it was interesting that there are more CEOs in the US who are graduates from the General Electric training scheme than there are from Harvard Business School. So I think for your organization, you're going to want to balance the extent to which you value education over experience. A third main consideration on talent is about generations, generation Y and Z, and I'll come back to that. A fourth one is about there's no room for generalists anymore. That's the feeling. So I'm lucky I'm coming to the end of my career. Generalists will just be competing with Wikipedia and its future equivalents. They won't compete with specialists with management experience. A fifth one is the relationship competency. Everyone in the workplace in the future will have to have a very strong competency on relationships, particularly in cross-cultural situations, and for our world particularly. And the final one on talent is engagement, engagement with staff. If you don't do it, you won't get it. So talk to your staff, communicate with them, and then they will engage back with you. And for values-based organizations like ours, that's critically important. So for the future, I had a blank piece here for anything which Randolph hadn't mentioned, just in case there was something else I had thought of, but there wasn't. So I will move on from there to the various things which, the trends and the challenges which I think we have to be aware of. So who are you going to be using to achieve your mission in the future? And some of these have come up already. Clearly they're national staff, because expatriates are expensive, because first responders like the local Red Crosses are local, and because skills do certainly exist. I was in Sri Lanka when the Pakistan earthquake happened, and a lot of Sri Lankans who had experience in the tsunami were furious that they weren't being deployed. But Westerners were coming out, and that's on the regional basis. A second is development staff. So you will be thinking of using development staff for humanitarian response in dual mandate organizations, certainly, and this responds to Randolph's point about the preparedness. Capacity building, yeah, you will want to have capacity builders, those who can develop the local capacity. Again, picking up on Randolph's point about expertise, there was an organization that I visited in East Africa recently, which is reducing its local staff from about 200 to, in 5-10 years' time, to 10. And what they will primarily be doing is trying to provide expertise to the local partners that they currently have, who will, in 5 or 10 years' time, be local NGOs. But recognizing that those local NGOs will not have all the WASH expertise or the health expertise perhaps that they need. So this international NGO will say, we've got these in an emergency, we will loan them to you. Virtual people. There will be a lot of online working, I think, in the future. And I did some research for ECHO just after the earthquake in Haiti about where the gaps were in the capability of NGOs, and it was quite clear that a lot of those gaps could be being filled by people who are at the other end of a computer in London. They didn't need to be in Haiti at all, so more could be achieved and allow much more time and local expertise to be getting on with what was needed on the ground. More on this, are they master's students? Back to the point about experience and education, you need to decide whether those master's students are offering you what you want. Onto the generations, so Generation Y, these are slightly stereotypical decisions on what these two generations are about. Generation Y is 1980 to 1994, and what they want is development opportunities and careers. and they want mentoring so that they have a mixture of autonomy and support, and they need a strong brand to which their leaders are loyal. So if you're going to attract those people, these are the kind of things that you need to have in place. And for Generation Z, those people who are born after 1994, and my suspicion is that this will change in a few years' time, at the moment there are risks with this generation. They won't stay long because careers just are not in their current plans, and these are based on interviews with current students, so there is some realism there. Another risk is information security, because their loyalty will be to their social networks and not necessarily to an employer. You will only be able to find them through their own media, it's felt. And I know that the British Secret Service is currently recruiting through games. So only if you get to level 15 in some wonderful war game will you see the advert from the British Secret Service, because those are the people that they want, those who can get through that process, who are interested in that kind of game. This Generation Z, they want their contribution to fit into a bigger picture and are best rewarded for small steps rather than on a promise. And for these people, you need to embed a culture of intrapreneurship. If that's a new term, it's like entrepreneurship, but it's about new ideas within your organization. So you're going to have to encourage intrapreneurship and allow these ideas to run. So how long will these people be with you? Well, I mean, how long are people with you now? How many different sorts of contracts do you have? So there are interns and volunteers, there are short-term contracts, there are full-term contracts, part-time contracts, consultants. There's any sort of way in which you can currently get your work done. I suspect you'll continue to favour short-term contracts simply because that's how the funding is currently being offered to you, but maybe that will be less true when or if you get your regional fundraising up and running, as a lot of organisations are doing. Also, in terms of how long they'll be with you, you're going to want to reduce your recruitment costs, particularly in these times of financial difficulty, by upskilling your current staff. This is the big retention idea. So a lot of investment in learning and development. There's a figure in the UK that it now costs £6,000 sterling, about the same in euros, to recruit a middle manager, and the average annual spend on an employee in the voluntary sector is £191. So you can imagine how much you can ramp up that learning and development spend before you get a negative return on investment on recruitment. The final point on how long they'll be with you is that they may not be yours at all, and there's quite a lot of talk about shared rosters, about talent alliances, and particularly in relation to surge capacity. So will there be central rosters? And the idea from ECHO at the moment about the European aid volunteers is just one example in the volunteering sphere of that. But certainly there's a group of UK NGOs who are talking quite heavily about the advantages or disadvantages of shared rosters and about talent alliances, so that if you've only got Mary on a short-term contract, you can loan her to another organisation and get her back when you get more funding. What will these people do for you? Well, the quick answer is they'll be doing too much because of all the financial and recruitment cuts and because of the increasing needs. So I was in a meeting of all the UK NGO HR directors a couple of weeks ago, and they all said workload was the big issue, and this one has to be knocked on the head. One of them had just got its engagement survey back from staff, where 40% of its global staff, this is over 3,000 people, had strongly agreed with a question about too much work. That's huge. And I don't have all the answers now, but we'll be working on it for sure. What will they do? Well, they will have competences which are more like this, about relationship building, about building communities of practice, about facilitating information exchange and influencing. And these competencies are on this handy little thing here, which People in Aid developed with a group of agencies in the UK. And they are like this. They are relationship orientated, and that's quite important for the future. So what will you have to do as an organization going into the future? I think you'll have to look to share. So you'll share staff. I think you'll share costs of training. You'll find it's cheaper to put on joint trainings. You'll outsource your systems, your HR systems. And related to the competencies is the development of an idea which Bioforce and ourselves and Randolph indeed is engaged with, of a learning and development passport related to a professional qualification framework, which we hope will become entirely global and make a lot of things much more simpler for recruiters. What else will you have to do? You'll have to be values driven. You'll also have to, and this relates to Randolph's point on speculation, there's a corporate phrase called organizational agility. And this is about how you as an organization learn and innovate in order to meet your future challenges and capture the opportunities. It starts with the leaders and requires staff to accept that the dominant logic, i.e. what it is that you do today, may not be what the future is. This clearly carries risks. Some of it I've mentioned about the use of new technologies, but others would be pulling back from operational work so that the French or the British organization would just be doing the advocacy and the fundraising here, or putting mission before brand in an alliance of specialists. These are quite big things for the organization to think about. What more will you have to do? You'll have to focus hard on diversity. I've mentioned the culture before, on engagement with particularly remote and virtual working staff. In the HR function, you'll have to continue to promote the practice of workforce planning and the role of HR in all of that. If you want to respond to an emergency, you won't be able to if the organization hasn't bought into the surge need in every department in advance. You'll be having to focus on return on investment, I'm afraid. You'll be having to look at metrics, and where those metrics have a financial output, that's what your bosses and your funders will be asking you to produce. So you want to invest in coaching. How do you assess the value of the coaching input by the business outcomes offered by those who've been through the coaching process? And finally, you'll have to, I feel, listen much more to the beneficiary needs. And these are some comments which I'm not going to translate. I'm not going to ask the kind translators to translate, from various reports, which are comments on people, our people, NGO people, from the beneficiaries that they're working with. But I'd start with a quote from a report written by Antemond a couple of years ago about the importance of relationships. Development, they say, is about NGO management, but it's also about relationships with people. It continues that if development workers are not motivated and happy at home as well as at work, then the relationships affect the quality and impact of development on the ground. Now, this is probably bread and butter stuff, but it's important to emphasize it. And the Listening Project, which was responsible for a number of these quotes, has done a lot of investigations in the field which resonated with me. And two of the points that I would bring out are how staff are evaluated and rewarded for meeting targets on time and on budget, whereas staff themselves would prefer to spend more time with the beneficiaries than they would writing reports and log frames. The second one is about how the tyranny, as they call it, of Western or donor deadlines and decision-making processes clash with the community's own ways of thinking and deciding, so there's no time for reflection together. And that will imply different skills for your aid workers about not participation, but actually listening, which is important. So I think as a sector, we need to do more and know much more about beneficiary thoughts. We have to collect this form of evaluation, and I would volunteer people in aid to collect them on our behalf, analyze them, and feed them back as lessons that we need to learn. But I will leave it there. Thank you very much.